Welcome back. This is Rudy Giuliani with Rudy's Common Sense. Today we are going to deal with a subject that is of great concern. It's gotten some attention, but I don't believe it's gotten the attention that it deserves given the enormity of the problem, and that is the increasing number of attacks on Asian Americans, not only in New York, but throughout the country, and largely in our major cities. In fact, most of the studies that have been done have concentrated on 15 to 17 different cities where these crimes, starting in 2020, have become just have been subjected to increase after increase after increase. Now, it is true that attacks against Asian Americans were increasing before 2020, but at a much slower pace. So we're going to examine as much as we can about the characteristics of these crimes, and then we're going to try to figure out what the actual, cause is and what can be done about it. Now, having spent a great deal of time solving crime, and particularly organized crime, I don't mean mafia here, I mean organized crime that has a common theme or purpose, so that it can be seen in a larger group. Here's the most important thing. To solve crime, you have to define the problem 100% accurately. If you're off by a little, you make a mistake. That was true of our CompStat program, where you had to know exactly where the crime was, what was being committed, and then you had to respond there. You couldn't just have your police all over the city just sort of randomly responding to crime. It made much more sense to figure out where the crime was and put the right police in the right place to try to prevent it before it started. The same thing is true in these investigations. You have to define the problem correctly to solve it. And unfortunately, this whole Asian American attack situation has been subjected to a lot of false reporting, a lot of false conclusions, and of course, the usual racial fiction that we engage in because we're too afraid to tell the truth to each other, which is really the best indication that we're racist, because the truth will set you free. And the truth is not impossible to face, except for people who I think themselves have internal guilt about race and therefore cannot think logically and clearly. So attacks on Asian Americans, let's look at last year and this year together. Attacks on Asian Americans grew by a shocking 164% in the first quarter of 2021 in our 16 largest cities, where a very large percentage of the crimes against Asian Americans take place. So they're a good bellwether for what's going on. Now, in those investigations, the police departments identified 95 attacks on Asians in these 16 largest cities. And we'll get a chance to kind of generally take a look at them. Where did they come from, what they were about? And so that 95 is compared to only 36 in 2020 and even less in 2019. And in New York City, which has the largest Asian population in the United States, and they accounted for nearly half of those 95 attacks. Actually, exactly 42 of the 95 took place in New York. So New York is also a good place to look at if we want to locate the problem and then start thinking about what can be done that's more effective. And then New York, in the month of April, which is outside that first quarter, that terrible first quarter with 42 incidents, just in the month of April alone, in the first three weeks, there were 24 attacks. The most horrendous of which was an attack last week on a 61-year-old Chinese immigrant who was just brutally attacked by an ex-felon on parole. And you can see that footage. It's very hard to look at, but it gives you a sense of the impact of these crimes and the kind of fear justifiable fear it generates in the community, and how there can be all kinds of speculation as to the motivation, because as you can see, nothing much was said. It was just instantaneous where the hitting and the beating started. The evidence as to whether this was racially motivated or not is of course, somewhat sketchy. However, the thing that is not sketchy is this was a brutal, vicious attack. And whether you describe it as a hate crime or an aggravated felony, it clearly is a very, very serious crime. And what it did was, when that appeared, all of a sudden a racial overview was given to it that, by and large, the attacks against Asians are fueled by white supremacists and driven by President Trump's statements about the virus generating from China. Although there is no direct evidence of that in this particular situation. The man, as far as I know, never made any comment one way or the other with regard to Trump, and the material seized from him didn't indicate that. But of course, the media is never slowed down any time they can draw any inference that blames Trump for murder, for people starving, for homelessness, for anything. The incident that really brought this all to the fore was one that was extremely shocking. Even in a year in which we've become used to shocking events, this kind of stood out. It took place on March 16, 2021. It took place in Woodstock in Atlanta, Georgia. And a man by the name of Robert Aaron Long, 21 years old, went to 3 separate massage parlors, one in Woodstock, I believe, and the other 2 in Atlanta. And all told, he killed 8 people and he wounded 1. 6 of the people that he killed were Asians in the different massage parlors. It was a cold-blooded killing with no reason attached to it. It wasn't a hold-up. It wasn't a stick-up. It wasn't an attempted rape. Just went in there, shot them, and killed them. And 6 of the 8 are Asian. So immediately it raises the question, was it an anti-Asian attack based on anything that we said before? Well, Long himself says he is a sex addict, which I think is provable. And he shot up the massage parlors to reduce temptation for other people, and presumably also for himself. But he denies rather strongly that there was any racial motivation about it. So the reality is, it's going to be hard to call this a hate crime, since right now there doesn't appear to be any evidence that links it to it, other than the fact that the majority of the victims were Asian. He does seem to have another motive, which is this sex addiction that he has. He has spent time in sex addiction from 2019 to 2020. He was thrown out of the house the night before by his parents, allegedly for some other display of acts of sexual addiction. And the purpose of shooting up these massage parlors was to lower the temptation or the risk that other people would get involved in it. This is not to say that these massage parlors were in any way operating illegally or unfairly. There's just no way of knowing that. And since there are no allegations of that, it can't be assumed that these massage parlors are in any way anything other than legitimate. But in any event, they were shot up, 8 people died, 1 wounded, and the nation began a conversation, as we like to call it now, about white supremacy and how white supremacy is the cause of the attacks on Asian Americans, and it's the cause of all prejudice ultimately. So let's examine that. Let's examine if this is a white supremacist crime. No. Aside from the politics of it, which I'm trying to avoid, aside from the politics of it and the racial dispute about it, here's why it's important to determine the actual reason for these crimes. That's the way you stop it. That's the way you solve it. If you attribute murders to the Russian organized crime, and they're actually being done by Italian organized crime, you don't solve the crime. If it's politically incorrect, let's say, because Italian Americans are exerting a lot of influence on the government to attribute crimes to Italian Americans. And the government is weak enough to be swayed by that. They are then going to engage in the politically advanced theory that it was really done by Russians under that, hypothetical. Well, here, without further comment, let's go through the facts, and then we'll try to draw some conclusions. An axiom that I think is well known by many who are in the crime field, criminologists and people who just know a lot about crime, is that generally in America, violent crimes happen between people of the same race. That's why we talk about black on black crime, which is true. That accounts for 70 to 80% of the crimes, of even up to 85% of the crimes committed against black people are committed by other black people. Very similar statistic exists for white, a little bit less, but similar statistic applies to whites, that mostly whites are victimized by other whites. Less so than blacks, but white on white crime is a common characteristic. And this is an exception, because when you look at the Asian population, Asians, by and large, don't kill other Asians. The percentage of that is even less than whites killing other whites, which is rather small. Asians are killed by other people. And I guess the general notion is they're killed by white people as part of the white supremacist anti-Asian group. In New York City each year, and this has been true for this percentage doesn't vary even when crime was very high, when crime was very low, and now when crime is coming back. So you can pretty much count on these statistics. About 70 to 75% of the people murdered in New York City every year for 30 to 40 years are somewhere between 70 and 75% African American. Again, on the other side of the ledger, somewhere between 70 and 75% of the people arrested for those attacks, for murder in particular, are black. So we have 75% of the murder victims are black, 75% of the murder perpetrators are black, which does bear out the idea that it's mostly black on black crime. Black on black crime accounts for 3/4 of the murder of blacks. The others are Hispanic, and then very low numbers for whites and Asians in terms of whites or Asians killing blacks. And this is true in New York City. And those percentages, although somewhat different in other cities, pretty much bear out the same thing. And the fact is, the eerie thing about it is those percentages remain within 3 or 4 points of each other every single year. 70, 75% of the murders, people murdered, are black. 70, 75% of the perpetrators are black. Black on black crime is a reality, and it's the major way in which black people are killed. And when you combine it in New York City with there being more abortions of black babies and births, you've got a very serious problem of a community being wiped out. And in my view, not effective measures being enacted and enforced to prevent it. Time for a short break. Your credit card company found suspicious charges on your card. That's simple identity theft. It's annoying, but they cover it. The type of fraud you really need to worry about is home title theft, a devastating crime that takes you off your home's title. And you're not covered by insurance or most identity theft programs. That's why you need Home Title Lock. Here's how easy it is for cyber criminals to get you. The title documents to our homes are kept online. The thief forges your signature on a quitclaim deed stating you just sold your home, and he's the new owner. Then he borrows money using your home's equity and leaves you in debt. You won't know until late payment or eviction notices arrive. The instant Home Title Lock detects someone tampering with your home's title, they help shut it down. Let's get you protected. Go to HometitleLock.com and register your address to see if you're already a victim and enter Rudy for 30 free days of protection. That's promo code Rudy at HomeTitleLock.com. Thank you very much for returning, and let's continue our discussion. So maybe it's best if we take a look at a chart and we get an idea of what's going on, so it isn't just my word. But I know somebody's going to try to kill the messenger. They always do. But I'm getting used to it. In service of the truth, you have to tell people things they don't want to hear. And if you can't reach the truth, you can't solve the problem. So this is a group of statistics from the Department of Justice. They go back to 2018 because these statistics are hard to gather and hard to verify. So there's usually a lag of 1 or 2 years. And even with the increased numbers of crime, I don't know that these statistics would change very much. They remain pretty constant over the years. And what's going to emerge from these statistics is I guess, an inconvenient truth that the left just doesn't want to face. What it tries to analyze is how many people of different racial groups commit crimes outside their racial group. If we're talking about black on black, white on black, Hispanic on Hispanic crime, we don't have Asian on Asian crime, but those three, how do the percentages differ as between and among the different people? Well, according to this table 12 from the Department of Justice handbook in 2018, I believe it is, we see that blacks made up 1.15 million of the offenders of violent crime, but only 0.64% of the victims, which means they are 2 times more likely to be perpetrators than victims. Now, this is not true since we're contrasting it with Asians. Asians tend to be much more the victims, and much fewer of them are perpetrators, so that the majority of Asians, just given the number of these statistics, are necessarily attacked by people other than Asian, which again is not true for blacks or whites. It's a different phenomenon. It's different. And it's a big difference because the numbers are dramatically different. Now, what I just said to you, that blacks commit 2 times more crimes, violent crimes, than they are victims of crime, whereas for Asians, it's almost just the opposite. They are the victim of crimes quite a bit now, but they much more rarely are the perpetrators of the crime. And the same thing is true of whites, but the scale is a little bit different. And this has to be evaluated in figuring out what's going on, rather than lying about racism. These are just statistics. These are just facts. So we have to come to terms with the fact that these attacks that we're going to have to solve on Asian Americans are coming mostly from the minority community. The idea of white supremacy, or this is a white attack against them, is belied by the fact that whites are not the largest group that attacks Asians as a gross number. Blacks are. 75% of the attacks on Asians come from other than white, which hardly suggests that this is some white power movement. And finally, when I use that 27%, you got to realize there are many, many more whites. So if we do a per capita comparison, it's really quite dramatic that whites' attacks on Asians are very, very small in comparison to people from the minority community, who tend to be usually the attacker, not always. The long case can kind of take it out of focus, because there's a prominent white man with what he says is a religious motive. I guess people could say he may be lying, But the reality is he says it wasn't racially motivated. It was religious in nature. But you're entitled to your own opinion on that. And I think further examination is necessary because it is awfully coincident that 8 people are killed and 6 of them turn out to be Asian. Might be, he's right. He's a mad sexual addict, mad meaning somewhat out of his rocker. But we just don't know. The evidence right now suggests, and all we know is that he did it because he wanted to remove temptation for himself and for others. I know that's a sick reason, but he sounds like a sick man. Now, in 2018, according to the FBI statistics, blacks are 50% more likely to commit violent crimes against whites than whites are to commit it against blacks. And blacks are way more likely to commit crimes against Asians than Asians against blacks. Asians commit very, very few crimes against black people. Less than 1% of violent crimes are committed against blacks by Asians. That's 0.1%. While 27.5% of the crimes against Asians are committed by blacks. And that's the largest single percentage for any racial group. So it's a very, very startling conclusion that the major violence being done to Asian Americans, as we read about all these new cases, is coming from the other than white community. I know those statistics were a little, dense, and I tried to put them up on the board to make them as easy as possible for you. But I have them there because I know if I just said this, I'd be accused of being a racist, and they'd ask that I be fired, although this is my own podcast, I guess I'd have to fire myself, and that I be canceled and or depersonated like in Orwell's 1984. From my prior podcast, we learned all about Orwell and being depersonated. I know they really like to put me in jail for something. Maybe this could be the thing they put me in jail for. So that's why I used the statistics. What I just said to you is not Rudy Giuliani telling you that. It's Rudy Giuliani reading to you from the Department of Justice reports as recounted by a reporter who seems to be pretty much even-handed, Michael Kwander, who grew up in an African-American neighborhood, I believe, as an Asian, and has both anecdotal experience, of the violent acts of blacks against Asians, but has a rather balanced view of it in terms of seeing doesn't come out of the person's race. It comes out of the social circumstances and the economic circumstances. And certainly, even though the numbers are large, it's a minuscule percentage of the African-American community. So let me try to calm that down a little because, I faced this when I dealt with the mafia 30 years ago. And I'm Italian-American, and as soon as the first couple of mafia cases started, lo and behold, I'm being accused of being anti-Italian. And I'm giving the impression that all Italians are members of the mafia. Just like if you talk about black statistics, you're giving the impression that all blacks are criminals. Well, let's be adult now. And let's talk to each other as intelligent, serious adults trying to solve a problem. The mafia was always a very minuscule part of a wonderful community, the Italian-American community that made great contributions to America. And those who felt unnecessarily burdened by it weren't thinking clearly because if they had nothing to do with the mafia, not a problem. And if a few people suspected they did, that soon went away when there was legitimate pursuit of the actual problem and significant reduction of the people in the mafia. And I do think, in a way that was not worked out in advance, it helped that I was Italian-American leading the charge. It helped in terms of turning the public's mind to not all Italian-Americans are mafia. It hurt in that many Italian-American groups castigated me for it. And even when I ran for mayor the first time, they threw eggs at me, but they missed. Guess they weren't such good baseball players. So I beg you to please try to take the emotions out of this and the prejudices and think about it clearly. Because if we don't think about it clearly, we're never going to solve the problem of these attacks on Asians, and we'll never solve the problem of black-on-black crime, which has to be solved for the good of the black community in urban America. And that's an isolated problem. Most blacks in America are not criminals. Vast, overwhelming majority of blacks in this country are hardworking, good people. And because of these, what do we call them, ghettos or neighborhoods that have been allowed to develop and fester in cities that are incompetently governed, things have gotten worse. And I say incompetently governed, and I say that with great authority because I changed it in New York City dramatically for the benefit of African Americans and saved more African American lives than any mayor in history by going after the people with guns, taking away the guns, putting the requisite number of resources in the black communities over the objection of people in the white communities. Because that's where the crime was, which is why I'm telling you, if you don't define it correctly, you don't solve it. That's why we had 30 years of massive crime in New York City, and we tried everything. We couldn't solve it. We never described the problem correctly, and we never assigned the police correctly, and de Blasio is doing it all over again. All you need to know is the last riots in New York City, before the recent ones last year, was when New York City had their last Democrat mayor. We got a Democrat again, we got riots again, and we got riots all over the country. And riots can be stopped. There should never be a riot, and when there is one, the mayor should resign. Now, I say that because I had 8 years, took over a city that had 2 riots before, and I had none. And after a while, I don't even think they were thinking about it because of the preparations that I made to stop the riot before it started. Now, the final calculation, as I said, are that blacks are 280 times more likely to commit crimes against Asians than Asians are against black. Not a political point, not a propaganda point, not a racial point. It's the truth. It's the reality. It's the statistic. It's what we face. And now we'll take a short break. I accomplished a lot in 2020, exposing the truth, establishing the relationship with you, working tirelessly for America. And I came to know the work and value of the people at American Hartford Gold. You see, you buy gold not only for what you know, but you buy gold for what you don't know. American Hartford Gold is the company you can trust when it comes to buying gold. They sell physical gold and silver delivered right to your door or inside of your IRA. In the precious metals industry, they are the highest rated firm in our country with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau and thousands of satisfied clients. Give them a call and tell them Rudy sent you. And be sure to ask them what I bought. And if you call them right now, they will give you up to $1,500 of free silver on your first order. Folks, these are uncertain times. The one thing you can count on to protect what you have worked so hard for is physical gold and silver. So don't wait. Call them now. Call 833-GOLD-777. That's 833-GOLD-777. Or text Rudy to 65532. Again, that's 833-GOLD-777. Or text Rudy to 65532. Thanks for returning, and I hope you're getting as much out of this as I am. Now, what's the cause of this? Well, I can tell you what the liberals have done immediately. Immediately. I mean, first thing they tried to do is to say it was white supremacy. That white supremacy, that there are crazy white people running around killing Asians, and even the cognitively impaired president of the United States said that the most dangerous group in America or the world are white supremacists. Well, you don't take that seriously because he doesn't know what he's talking about. I mean, more dangerous than Islamic terrorists? More dangerous than the Ayatollah and the mullahs who are trying to have nuclear weapons? More dangerous than China, Russia. More dangerous than MS-13? This is why defining the problem incorrectly can lead you to the wrong conclusion and therefore the wrong approach to solving it. And it's the reason why I was successful and they weren't, because I was willing to face it honestly without all of the filters that are put there so that you don't offend people. Well, it's far better to offend people than to let them get slaughtered like they're doing in Chicago and New York and elsewhere. Maybe people aren't offended, but they're dead. Some solution, huh? But just to show you how far they go, even though these statistics show that Asians are murdered well over a majority of time by non-whites, somehow, some way, they find a way to blame it. They find a way to blame it on white supremacy. Yes, on white supremacy. Whites aren't doing it, but they're behind it because of the atmosphere that whites have created in America. This is part of the critical race theory that says that whites are responsible for everything that is wrong because of the original sin in 1619 of bringing slaves into the United States. This is a very, very strong point of the critical race theory. It's taught in school, by the way, if you don't watch out, and it dominates their whole thinking. It's really just a variant of the Marxist critical race theory, which held that all problems were created by the bourgeoisie's control of the proletariat. Well, now we're talking about the 19th century, in the middle of the 19th century into the 20th century. The bourgeoisie were the nobility or the rich middle class. The proletariat were the workers. And the Marxist theory was that all problems in society, all problems, were created by the subjugation of the workers by the bourgeoisie, and that things like God were used as props in order to maintain that control, because Marx believed that God was, as he describes it, an opiate of the people. In other words, it was like a drug given to people so that they would not face the truth, that there is no God, and that really socialism is God, and that should be served as the highest end in the community. But despite the fact that these statistics don't lie, and most of the crimes against Asian Americans are committed by non-whites, that didn't stop liberal publications from having headlines like cause of attacks on Asians, white supremacy. White supremacists go after Asians. When that failed, because that was disputed by several strong articles, including one by the wonderful Michelle Malkin, for which she took tremendous heat. When that failed, they then got to, well, maybe more of the crimes are committed by blacks, and maybe very few of them are committed by whites. But it's the whole structure that whites have created in America that causes the death of Asian American, not the person who actually shoots them, or in that horrendous footage we showed you at the beginning, beats them senseless for no reason at all. All right, now that we have the reason, how do we solve it? We solve it the same way we solve black on black crime, because it's, in many ways it's a subpart of that. Most of these crimes are committed by the same people who commit black on black crime. Most of the black community is lawful. Most of the black community is not violent. A lot of the black community does not live in these neighborhoods anymore. They've abandoned them, and they live in better city neighborhoods, not as afflicted by crime, with better schools, or they live in suburbs, live in rural areas. They live everywhere that white people, Hispanic people, and Asian people live. That was a day that wasn't true. That is true now. So we're talking about 16 cities. We're talking about the black population of those 16 cities. if not all of them, most of them are dominated by democratic machines for anywhere from 20 to 100 years. Some of those democratic machines are crooked. They have no desire to solve problems, just to steal money. And they've allowed black on black crime to just go on undeterred. Just why? Just how they square that with their conscience? I don't know. But how anybody in Chicago could square with their conscience the slaughter that takes place of black people every weekend is mind-boggling to me. So we've got to solve black on black crime. How do we solve black on black crime? I did. I reduced it 70%. My successor, Michael Bloomberg, using very similar tactics and in some cases improvements, I think got it up to about 80%. That's a pretty darn good reduction. First of all, you've got to begin with policing. The idea that you do away with the police and you defund the police and you get rid of the police and you send the social workers, that's part of the communist socialist theory to destroy this country so that they can substitute their form of government for the form of government that we now have. If you don't see that in all that Biden is doing, you're not looking. Get rid of the Supreme Court. Make it ridiculous. Let's have 50 members on the Supreme Court. Yeah, let's do away with the balance of power in Congress and get rid of the filibuster. Bring in a couple more Democrat states so it can be a one-party country. You know, socialists like one-party countries. And you see that some of their governors, Cuomo, Murphy, well, maybe not so much Murphy, Cuomo, Whitmer, Newsom, who's being recalled, they've got authoritarian tendencies, and I'm saying that nicely. I mean, they seem like they wouldn't mind having one-party rule. And in some of these cities, we've got the same people in office for 20 years. And if it isn't the same people, it's the same political machine for 50 years. So their goal is, we've got to break through that. We've got to break through that. We have to impose on the black community the same set of rules that are imposed on everyone else. They're going to have to be arrested for their crimes. Believe me, the vast majority of people in those communities will applaud you as they did me. When I put cameras in the housing developments, the libertarians and the liberals opposed me, and the people in the housing developments applauded me because they said they were now getting what rich people have had for a long time. So you have got to get beyond the lying propaganda of the liberal media, and you've got to get to the real people. Because these statistics are real people. They represent real people who are murdered. They represent sons taken away from their mothers and fathers. They represent daughters taken away from their mothers and fathers. They represent parents taken away from their children in large, large numbers. And you have a broken community as a result of that. And they realize that the solutions aren't there because nobody has the courage to just locate the problem except a few people who are then yell down. If they're black, they're called Uncle Toms or Uncle Tims, like Tim Scott. If they're white, they're called racist. Here's what they are. They're honest, decent people who want to save black people from dying and want to impose measures that reduce those murders by significant amounts, like I did. And more police, not less, are necessary. Better trained police, absolutely. Strategies based on CompStat to go at the different crimes that are involved. Yes, there's a role, really important role for long-term changes for work and for education. The initial way in which I reduced crime in New York was the police. CompStat, reassignment, new training, focusing on the crimes that really exist and getting crime down right away so that we restored confidence. We try to do it really quickly. But at the same time, we completely revolutionized the welfare program. We put 500,000 people on welfare to work. We reestablished the work ethic in those neighborhoods because in those neighborhoods, you can have 4 generations where nobody worked. How do you learn the work ethic if you don't learn it at home? You don't learn it. So these things have to be concentrated on. Yes, there has to be a concentration of police to get the emergency over with, the emergency of the people being killed every day. Second, there has to be a definite improvement in the schools, including safety in the schools, but a definite improvement in the educational level of the schools. And there has to be a deliberate movement away from dependency to independence. And there you're going to have the biggest fight of all, because the Democrats count on dependency for their vote. Don't they? Isn't that why they paid more people more money to not work than to work during the pandemic? The more and isn't that the reason behind this astronomically high $4 or $5 trillion bill, which involves a lot of giveaways, a lot more money into dependency programs by Biden, amounts of money that will lower the value of the dollar dramatically and take money out of the hands of, not just rich people. I mean, this rich people thing is gone. He used to say only over 400,000. Now it's 200,000. And when you devalue money, it affects everyone. So we have to concentrate on solutions for the Black community, because the crime problem there is worse than elsewhere. And the fact is that it's the Black community that in large numbers not only kills Blacks, but commits violent crimes outside of their community. Whereas the other communities, in particular the Chinese community, basically commit, in their case, their small number of crimes within their community. So if we can get a handle on that, then all crime goes down. And we can, if we can talk to each other truthfully. I am more than willing to engage in any conversation anybody wants to have about realistic solutions to police brutality to the extent that it exists, if they are willing to enter into equally honest conversation of Black on Black crime. Because you're not going to solve one without solving the other. And the second one, on a scale of magnitude, is much bigger. I mean, 97, 98, 99 maybe % of African Americans are killed by civilians, and mostly African Americans. Some very small percentage are killed by police, very small. Some of it justified, some of it not. Needs to be addressed. But so does the other. So, we'll be following up on this. And we'll be following up on this not just here, but on our radio shows and also on our weekly alert, which I hope you're starting to get used to. We do that on Friday, and we try to go over in that weekly alert deprivation of rights, where rights were taken away from people, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom to defend yourself, privacy rights in your home, things like due process. There'll be one this week that we focus on. Usually we don't make up our mind until the end of the week about the one for that week. So please stay with us. We're trying very, very hard during an administration that is doing tremendous damage to the fabric of America, to what our government's about, what we stand for. We're trying to fight back in a lawful, peaceful way with ideas, and most importantly, with the truth. God bless America, because this is a country in which we can do that so far. And thank you very, very much for listening in, and make sure you join us when we come back with another episode of Rudy's Common Sense.